So we're going to be talking about the early years of child development. And this is kind of exciting because some of you are learning this firsthand. I'm in this phase of parenting as well, as I have a child who's in early adolescence, and then I have children that range from that point to 3 years old. And so we're going to start off here with infant cognition in the sensory motor stage. And that's the stage from birth to 2 years old. Piaget, who's a theorist you'll read about, is research based on inferences from infants' interactions with their environment. Current research uses technology to make observations, a baby's tendency to orient to new stimulation and preferential responses, results of these paradigms, data about infants' perceptual abilities at various stages. I think infants can learn a lot and they're very perceptive, just like who they feel comfortable with being held with. A lot of stuff with attachment starts in infancy. There's a lot of work that's done currently with attachment theory. There's even this really sad thing with a monkey, and there's one monkey who is given a mother, and then there's one monkey who's given I want to say like a fake, like a stuffed animal, and then the other monkey has like a wired kind of mother, and just the comfort difference between the wired kind of creature and the one that's like a stuffed animal, and just it being cozy and all those kinds of things. And then just what happens with attachment when you don't feel attached to something. And infants, because, they're so little, they understand a lot through their senses. So vision, hearing, taste, smell, touch. Object permanence. Objects exist when the infant can't perceive them with their senses. And so involves representational thought as evidenced by hidden object tests. So if something's hidden, it doesn't exist, right? Like they don't quite get it. Example of infant becoming attached to a parent. Baby must have a concept of parent. So the person who watches them, and this is where, again, there's a really great book. It's called Becoming Attached. If you ever get a chance to read it, you might read it in another class, but it's a lot of Bowlby's work on attachment theory. Attachment begins from birth, and that's where you see a lot of things that are very different in our medical settings and hospital settings. Back in the day, a baby was born and immediately go to the nursery, and nowadays if you've had a baby anytime recently, or know someone that has, it's all about skin to skin. The baby never leaves the mother. If you ever watched The Marvelous Miss Maisel, I think she had her baby and her baby went in a drawer, like right next to her bed, and then the drawer went into the nursery. Kind of odd, but those were like the 50s, right? Like, so things have changed a lot because we realize attachment matters so much, right? We hear about babies in orphanages who aren't picked up a lot and they just stop crying because their needs aren't being met. And so, infants immediately connect to parents, but they have to be able to see the parent, sense the parent, the person who's feeding them, things of that nature. So recognition, feeling that something is familiar when it's repeated, right? So if they keep getting fed by the same person, so like oftentimes infants, if mom is nursing, like they know that's the person that's going to feed them, right? They can smell, they'll recognize the voice. A fetus will recognize the same voice that it heard in the womb, so that's why they say to talk to your baby while the baby is still in the womb, because the baby will familiarize itself with the voice, which is pretty amazing, right? I mean, so amazing. Creation is so amazing. And that kind of, that's how you develop connection. Even like, I think the noise, like my house, it's noisy all the time. There's a bunch of kids that live here. So I think even my daughter, who's the youngest, I feel like she was so used to noise because she heard noise all the time, while in the womb. And so when she came out, she wasn't like shocked by all the noise. Like it didn't startle her. It was just kind of like a given. Like she knew all their voices, wasn't like startled response. I mean, she just was like used to it. And that's amazing. Like it's like comforting. It's something that's familiar. And so that is something that is interesting about babies, that they can recognize your voice from the womb. It's comforting. Your heartbeat is comforting, especially for a mother who's been carrying a child. She hears the heartbeat. That heartbeat is then, the baby hears the heartbeat in the womb, and then being close to the mother, hearing the heartbeat is important. It's, it causes them to feel comforted, And so having and inferring intentions, may have intentions as early as 3 months, engages in means by behavior by 8 to 12 months, child diverts attention from one goal to another, shows evidence of developing executive functions, Distinguishes agency, ability to act alone. This is as they're growing, 8 to 12 months. And, then you start seeing them like kind of, try to negotiate for things or challenge you, or, they're starting to kind of get a sense of the world, the world and the way it works. If they cry, this is the kind of response they get, all those kinds of things, right? And it starts forming, after those, like, around 6 months, getting close to 8 to 12 months, you're crawling, there's more exploration, there's more, things they can challenge. It's pretty amazing how much can change in such a short amount of time. Then you get to preschool age, right? And we're getting more, words, we're getting more movement, more exploration, more executive functioning. Working memory holds info, so they're thinking about things, it stays in there. Self-regulation, able to, regulate themselves. Maybe that's where you have someone who's sucking their thumb, as a way to deal with frustration or anger. Cognitive flexibility allows us to shift attention from task to task, to be able to do one thing and then another thing. This is preschooler age. Understanding numbers, maybe sometimes letters, all those kinds of things are starting to happen. Perspective taking as an aspect of one's theory of mind, understanding that people's behavior is a function of their internal subjective mental states. Use of mental words indicates awareness of mental states. Social pretend play, important for interacting. It's so crazy. So I have four sons and I have one daughter. And it's so interesting because I've really seen like gender differences, because I have four sons and then I have this little girl, and we didn't have a lot of girl things because I had no daughters. And so it's just been so interesting to see her role play like certain things, like her holding a baby a type of way, or putting a diaper on a doll, or putting a diaper on a stuffed animal because we didn't have a doll. And it just been so interesting to see her play so much differently than my boys, without anybody kind of saying anything to her about it. It's all on her own merit. It's actually been quite amazing to watch. And she just does these things, and I'm like, man, it's so much different than my sons. Even the way she screams or cries, like my boys would be loud, but she like screams. She has this like girl scream and it's just so different. But again, this interactive, like she role plays way more than my boys ever did, and pretends and has conversations and all these kinds of things, way more than my sons ever did. But definitely that pretend play is happening at her stage, and she's like at that preschool kind of stage. Most aspects of language is learned by 5. And this is where, as clinicians, when we're having clients come in, and maybe if you're a clinician that wants to work with children, this is where we notice that some of these things aren't happening, that maybe there's some deficit somewhere, or there's maybe something else going on that needs to be addressed, and maybe have a medical consultation, or maybe some sort of testing needs to happen. Because if there's certain, fundamental steps that aren't taking place, we need to make sure everything's being evaluated to make sure what's going on. Maybe it's just a late bloomer, and those are things that happen, or maybe there's something more going on that needs to be examined or discussed. And that's one of the things we're there for, is to help like kind of rule out what it is that's happening that could be affecting that child, that's causing them not to meet certain milestones. Okay. So language sounds by 5, how to link words in a meaningful way, making sentences, speaking more than one language. My children have all done dual language. And so even in kindergarten, they were learning 2 languages. Our culture is a little unique in that we're not like some European cultures where they're in areas where they know multiple languages, but kids can learn a language very young and learn more than one. It's pretty amazing. Kids are pretty amazing. And they can learn how to I'm not saying that right. How to have different tone of voice, reference or inference. I think I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I'm not. But like different kind of tone of voice, high pitch, lower, especially if they're talking about a certain way. we notice this if we talk to a baby a certain type of way, right? Like they get excited or they know that's like a mad sound or like, no, 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 those kinds of things. They gauge like emotion based off those different ways we do our voice, right? But those are things that even young children can kind of do. So again, all these things are happening. We're in the preschool age. We're growing our vocabulary, maybe some storytelling. We're enjoying books, learning words, letters, making sentences. It's important to have, good experiences with the preschool teacher. And that gives them opportunities to learn more and grow more. Structure is important. And again, it's a way for kids to have routine, structure, for them to develop and to grow, and just develop more at their age, and maybe prepare them for TK or kindergarten. I know in our state in California now kids are able to go to TK at a much younger age than they used to, which is a really nice thing for parents. It's to help get them like kindergarten ready. And so this is something that's kind of new that more children can go. But again, like all these things are helping them grow and develop social skills, how to interact with others, how to share, how to play kindly, what we do in front of people, what we don't do in front of people. I remember with thumb sucking with one of my children and talking about how to kind of stop the habit because it was hard to stop. Still goes on actually to some degree, but they're saying there'll be some level of social I don't want to say in a mean way, but like basically the peers will say something to him and he'll realize, oh, I shouldn't do this anymore. I'm getting too old for this, because his peers will start maybe judging him for sucking his thumb. And so I'm like, oh, it's like a social way of kind of stopping a behavior. Like, oh, you may want to pick your nose by yourself, but you probably are going to pick your nose in front of a bunch of people. You learn like, oh, that's not seen as cool. But if I do it by myself, nobody's seeing it, not to say it's still cool, but it's like you pick up on those things when you're around other kids, when you're around other peers, right? And so that's part of what's happening in these early phases. There's this like all these things that kids are learning, whether it be social skills, emotional intelligence, their cognitive ability, even their bodies physically are developing and growing, and they're growing into themselves. As this goes on, you'll start to see even in babies their personality come out, how they act, how they behave. If you have more than one child, if you know more children that are siblings, maybe if you look at your own family, how different each person is, right? You can grow up in the same household, have the same rules, and really see things very differently. Not uncommon, right? Pretty normal, but these are things that start developing at a very, very, very early age, okay? And so this is the stuff that, again, we're learning about, we're talking about. And so it's very interesting. So emotions at birth. So maybe it's kind of basic, right? Distress, contentment, disgust, interest. By 6 months, we get anger, surprise, fear, and sadness. 18 to 24 months, we have self-conscious emotions. So pride, shame, embarrassment, guilt. 36 months, full range of human emotions. And lastly, infants begin to recognize another's emotional expressions. So they can mimic faces and all those kinds of things. And then hopefully emotional intelligence continues to develop into adulthood. And they're able to, that will help with social skills and reading other people and empathy and all those kinds of stuff. Okay. So emotional regulation is huge. We talk about this a lot in therapy, about kids being emotionally regulated. Emotional dysregulation is what causes a lot of behavioral issues at school. When kids are frustrated and they don't know how to behave, and then maybe they act out impulsively, that's where we maybe have some behaviors and we have to learn how to regulate emotions. For example, my son, very competitive, gets mad about a board game, throws the board game. Is that healthy emotional regulation? No, it is not. Now, if we work through that and be like, okay, you're angry, you're allowed your anger. However, how we handle our anger is a whole other situation. We can be angry, but throwing the game over is not a way we handle our anger. So maybe we take a moment, we walk away, we take some deep breaths, right? We maybe get in touch with our senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, to bring us back down to a more neutral level, to bring us back down to present, to not be so caught up in our feelings that we're missing out on things. These are the things we have to teach kids to do, because emotional regulation doesn't necessarily just happen, okay? It's something that's a learned behavior, sometimes a trained behavior, okay? Because we all know our emotions can be all over the place. Even us as grown-ups don't have very good emotional regulation. So as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, I mean, we're expecting them like, don't act like that. Well, it's like, why not? You know, especially if they see you act like that, right? They mimic their parents and all those things. So making sure what we foster an environment, or we teach parents or train parents how to have good emotional regulation for their kids so they can implement those things at home. Because again, it's not something that you just know. And again, depending on how you interact with your children or your clients interact with their children, that's how they're going to be that's how they're going to interact with other people. And so that's something to be very conscientious of. And that's where a lot of work with kids, you're going to be doing a lot of work with parents, because a lot of issues with kids kind of has to do with sometimes parenting. And so having family sessions, working with parents to help them work with their children, it's not necessarily always because of a lack of love or a lack of concern or anything like that. It's just, you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you're doing the best you can based on the tools you've been given. Not maybe no one ever worked with them on that, so they don't know how to do it. And so that's where I say knowledge is power. Being able to educate people on how to train themselves, to train their children, or how to change something, a generational curse, whatever that may be. It's a process. Okay, it's a process. And so we have to be, so that's where we have to be open to that, and really, you know, be kind and helpful. And I mean, even me, like, I'm a therapist. I don't get it right with my kids all the time. I say sorry a lot, you know, without the but, right? That's important. We need to be able to say sorry without the but. And so, you know, just something to be mindful of. That will be something you will do for emotional regulation. We'll be talking about that a lot, especially if you want to work in a school setting. Attachment, I kind of talked about that a little bit. Bowlby is like the father of attachment theory. And you know, it's the infant and the primary caregiver. And so it really does affect people. Attachment's a huge thing. And if you ever, like I said, if you ever get to read that book, Becoming Attached, it's very eye-opening. And how people are just approaching things is so different compared to how we used to approach them. How we used to handle, like, even children in hospitals. Like, we kind of just leave them there, and they would grow more distant, more sad. Over time of being left in the hospital without the parents. You know, the beginning of attachment starts from 0 to 8 months, right, of a child's life. That you'll have separation anxiety and stranger anxiety by 8 to 9 months. And so when you have systems like that foster infant caregiver social bonding oriented systems, so recognizing systems enhances special responsiveness and encourages contact between the two, meaning like a 2-parent home. Intuitive parenting enhances attunement of communication. Each mirrors others' behaviors, and attachment, stable preference for caregiver to satisfy all functions of attachment system. So here's some science on attachment. Oxytocin is released not only in nursing, but it's also released in birth, right? And it increases in parents and promotes caregiving activities as babies gets older. Ironically, too, oxytocin is released in orgasm. But when you think about like intimate connection, obviously difference, because one's a sexual connection, one's like obviously like a parenting connection, so very different, but it's an intimate connection. And there's a level of intimacy that's developed between a parent and a child, right? There's a closeness, you came from me, all those kinds of things. And so there's some level of like, babies can even smell your hormones. It's weird, right? That's amazing though, but it's weird. And so sensitivity of mother's caregiving affects how brain structures and functioning develop in infants. So if you're not picking up, this is where postpartum depression can be really be very, I don't want to say the word dangerous, because a lot of women struggle with postpartum depression. Even my group practice, we have support groups for postpartum. But this is why it's so important to get help and all those things, because this is such a fundamental time with attachment and things of that nature. And sometimes when women are going through that, there's the level of they're not able to attach to their babies, which affects the baby too. And hopefully somebody else will step in if mom's not feeling attached, and that will help with attachment for the baby. But it's such a pivotal time when a baby's born, is to feel attached to a caregiver. Okay. So every attachment, to a person is different. They're securely attached. We talk about this in even adulthood. Securely attached people show distress when separated from securely attached show distress when separated from mother, eager to greet her when she returns, and see mother as a secure base, so safe. Anxious or ambivalent, insecurely attached, show distress when separated from mother, cry more than other babies, act angry when mother returns, and approach and resist. Avoidant, insecurely attached, fail to cry when separated from mothers, avoid, ignore her when she returns, unemotional. And disorganized, disoriented, insecure, attached, contradictory behaviors, approach for comfort, avoid when she approaches. And then, all those different styles. And we see this in adults with their own relationships. And usually it's because it started long, long before, they started dating. Insensitive parenting can be seen as obviously neglectful. And this can be seen in sometimes depressed mothers, neglectful care, understimulation of infant, reduced eye contact, infrequent holding, psychological markers, less laughing, more fussing, more negative emotions seen in infant. Infants less effective in coping with their own stress because of a negligent parent. Okay, they're not as attuned to the child. Child's role in attachment, infant temperament. Temperaments, emotional and behavioral characteristic traits, fearfulness, reactivity, negative emotions, are things that can come up if infant is not properly attached. You also have genetic things, obviously medical things that can affect it. If a child's born on any sort of drugs, that's going to affect the child's temperament. It's going to affect the child. So these are all things that can affect a child at birth, okay? What's the role of temperament in development? Greater emotional regulation in babies with sensitive care, greater challenge to provide sensitive care to difficult baby, greater ability of some mothers to respond sensitively. Temperament traits linked to attachment quality in first year. So a lot happens in that first year of life with baby bonding. And that's where a lot of women and people are fighting for longer maternity leaves, things of that nature, because the first year of life is so pivotal. And, women are forced to go back to work between 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how they have the baby. There's other cultures that get way more time off, right? And there's a lot going on. A baby is very young at 6 weeks, and I'm not casting judgment. I'm a working mom myself. But, when you look at these other cultures where they get to have their babies home with them for a long, long, long period of time, it's just, I can't not help the baby potentially, and we just kind of throw people back out in the workforce. Like, you got to work, you got to pay your bills. Like, again, no judgment. But there's even a lot biologically that's happened in a woman after birth, between the sleeplessness, the huge toll having a baby plays on your body. There's just a lot. And so 6 weeks is not a lot of time. You're barely getting the swing of things. And then you're forced to try to juggle all the things. And so that's where it's a big, it's a big discrepancy in our culture. We talk about it often, typically, and it's not to be gender biased or anything, but typically mother is primarily the person the child's attached to, not in all circumstances, but in most. Father can be a significant caregiver, and is obviously important. And even if that father's role, if the baby's really attached to mom, is the father supporting mom as mom's kind of going through this and learning, especially a first-time parent. There's a lot to learn, especially the newborn stage. It's overwhelming. excuse me, I don't think anyone's prepared for it. It's very overwhelming. Um, and so, it's not to hurt dad's feelings. It's just, especially if mom is feeding baby, waking up with baby, baby knows mom's voice, it's been living in mom's body. All those things can be, um, draw some level of connection, right? And so again, if maybe dad's role is more of a supportive role, they'll definitely get their feet wet, at some point. But and maybe trying to have that special time with baby when they can, right? Like, let me take the baby, let me hold the baby, let me, maybe give the baby a bottle if that's something that you're doing. Are all ways to bond, right? Doing skin to skin, all that stuff is a way to build a connection, things of that nature. Okay. So again, I'm not trying to throw shade on anyone's way of parenting or how your circumstances have been. And I'm sure your kids are all fine. I came from a background of cry it out, and I'm like, I hope my kids are okay. I mean, that's just what you did, 13 years ago. Stuff changes all the time. Science changes all the time. Just because people in the 1950s put their babies in drawers for a nursery doesn't mean all the babies are disturbed, right? Because that's all of our grandparents or parents. Things are morphing and changing all the time. Like I said, knowledge is power. Attachment is important. These are things that we're learning. You'll see in other cultures, they carry their babies for like months, like in packs, and we're so eager to kind of have them be independent. And it's like, wait, but they're babies, And so you're going to have to do what's comfortable for you. But as clinicians, it's learning some of these things so we can best help our clients, help them with maybe support that they need. If it's postpartum, addressing it so that they can connect with their baby, or if they're so fixated on all the rules and all the things, helping them work through that, because it can be very overwhelming. Parenting is very overwhelming, especially if you don't have a lot of support. And so that's where we come alongside and offer a lot of support. But it's helpful for us to know this information so we know the stage, or we know what the developmental things of the cues are, so we can help with support or resources or just knowledge to give to these parents so that they feel more capable of making decisions, or maybe even feel validated in what they're experiencing. So I hope this information is helpful for you. I hope this isn't making you feel a type of way about your own parenting. And maybe if you're going to be a parent, hopefully you find this information helpful and you'll make certain decisions about how you're going to raise your kids. Have a good evening.